Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be tier ranking some popular fantasy fandoms. I think, and you'll see when I go through this, there are certain fandoms that I would consider myself, I guess you could say, a part of because I make content online about those particular books or series, and I engage with other people and talk about theories and talk about characters, and so I will say that I'm a part of certain fandoms and I like the stories, but I recognize that those fandoms are awful. And then there's other ones that maybe I'm not a part of, but from everything I've seen, they seem really, really lovely. And I kind of wish I liked certain things more just because it looks like a lot of fun over there. Regardless, I think that fandoms and how you are a part of a fandom is going to affect your perception of them. Like I've been saying, I do think that there are certain ones I'm a part of, but I recognize are very negative in nature. However, you might have had a completely different experience. Maybe that fandom was really welcoming to you. Or maybe there have been times where you have been critical of something and they still were really receptive to it. They were really nice to you. And so you think, wow, that's a really nice fandom, even though I didn't really like the thing that they love. And so it's very interesting how different our relationship with fandoms can be. I also think being a part of a fandom can create a different perception of it than to actually be making videos or making content about that fandom in whatever way that you do. Because when you're just participating in Reddit threads or in looking up beautiful fan art and that sort of thing, then you might think overall positive ideas about the fandom, where if you're making reviews or, like I'm saying, any form of content, you might be on the receiving end of that negativity that otherwise other people don't see. So I just think the idea of fandoms is fascinating. Before I get into the tier ranking though, I do want to say if you're a fan of fandoms, then definitely check out the candle company Novel Wicks. They were nice enough to send me a couple of their candles, and they don't just have bookish themed ones, they also have, just in general, some very popular fandoms. They'll have content for those. Not content, sorry, I'm stuck in my video making process. They have candles for those. So you can see this one is Pam from The Office, and this one I am definitely excited for because my husband loves The Office. The scent is very springtime summery, because it's quite a fruity scent. They have the wood wick, which I love because I love the crackling sound, and then pretty sparkles in the candle. And it really does smell very nice and fruity and refreshing. So like I said, great for spring, summer. The Strider one, Lord of the Rings, smells so good. So it smells like a really new bar of soap. Do you know what I'm talking about? When the old school, well, maybe it's not old school to you, I don't know. I use body wash, but when you take a bar of soap out of its little cardboard and it's the first time, and it just smells so good and so clean. That scent, I love that scent. I don't know, maybe it makes me think of when I was a baby or something because I just love it. But that's what this one smells like. So I'll have Novel Wicks linked. Here's the top of that one, by the way, with the wood wick again. I'll have Novel Wicks linked because some of the ones I'll be talking about today, they have candles for that. Like, for example, the A Court of Thorns and Roses fandom. If you're a big fan of Sarah J. Maas, they have tons of stuff for Sarah J. Maas. Jumping into the tier ranking, I have 5 different tiers, and I'm gonna start as I usually do by placing things in the middle tier and then working my way to the top and the bottom, just because I think it's more fun that way to get to the extremes toward the end. And then also, I have had some people say, oh, I prefer when it's spontaneous, and I completely understand, but I'm too indecisive. I have to figure it out beforehand. Otherwise, I will waste all of your time pondering. So I'm not going to do that. I have it already figured out. And the roster, the lineup, I'll let you know what fandoms I'm going to be going through as well as the tiers. So I'll start with the tiers. The middle tier is neutral. And what I mean by that is I know there are fans of the series out there, but they don't really feel like a fandom. They don't really feel like they have any kind of collective essence, I guess you could say. Community, that's a better way to put it. They're not just floating in the air as a feeling, but they don't really feel as though they have a community necessarily. But if you talk about those series, then the fans will show up and they'll have a conversation with you, and they'll be friendly and they'll be nice and they'll be receptive to what you're saying, and they'll engage in a polite and respectful manner. But it doesn't really feel like they're necessarily, like I said already, they don't really feel like they have a sense of community, but then also it doesn't feel like they're making a ton of artwork for the series. It doesn't feel like they are making a ton of products for the series like Novel Wix has for the candles. It just feels like they just like what they like, which happens to be these series, and then that's kind of it. Another layer to the middle one is that I think some of these individuals maybe are a little more introverted. And I'll be curious to see if you agree, because I have a couple that I'll place in that middle spot. And you'll have to let me know if you think that the fandoms in that spot are indeed more introverted. Like, something about those series, it brings in an audience that doesn't necessarily subscribe to the fandom culture. But anyway, getting now into some of the other ones. The very bottom, to me, is just the worst of the worst. I almost have to, it feels like, warn people if they're going to talk about a series. Be careful if you talk about this one, because you're probably going to face a lot of negativity, people being rude to you, saying absolutely horrific things to you, horrible, horrible, horrible behavior. And then the one above that, it feels like the behavior's not great by any means, but it also feels like it's self-regulated. So what I mean by that is, with these huge fandoms, you're going to find that the larger they are, of course, the larger the percentage of the bad apples, that's going to be bigger too. And they often are very loud voices, sadly, within the fandom. But these individuals over here, who are the nicer side, will tell off those people, or they will talk about how they don't think it's acceptable what they're doing. So while that voice is prominent, at least there's some people pushing back against it. We already covered what the middle one was. The top two, the second highest, would be people that make a lot of content, people that are making tons of fan art, people that are so excited about the series. They're always on the hype train, they're having a good time. But there is some negativity, a little bit. It's much quieter than what we saw in the fourth tier, but it still exists. It's just few and far between, or it's not as extreme as what you see with the bottom ones. And then the top, just people that are excited to talk to you even if you didn't like it, people that are so nice to you even if you didn't like it. If you do like it, they're very much like, yes, isn't the series great? Everybody is just having the time of their life. They make tons and tons and tons of content. They have all these different Reddit threads. They're just very much about the sense of community. They're about whatever the thing is that they really love. It inspires them to make additional art. That's the top. So we're going to start now with what the lineup is, and then we'll get into the rankings. So we have A Court of Thorns and Roses, Fourth Wing, which is a newer one, but I wanted to talk about those individuals that I've had some interactions with. Wheel of Time. I'm breaking up Sanderson's fans, so the Sander fans. I'm breaking that up from just Stormlight Archive, because I do think there's a difference. And just like I could have said Sarah J. Maas, I could have had ACOTAR, Throne of Glass. I could have done different series. Throne of Glass tends to have a slightly different audience than ACOTAR, or I could have grouped it as one and just had Sarah J. Maas, but I decided not to worry about Throne of Glass, just talk about ACOTAR, but that same concept applies, where I feel like Stormlight Archive is its own fandom, and then there's the Sander fans, who are just kind of Cosmere lovers. They'll read his YA books, they'll read anything he's written, so those are two different ones. And then we have Witcher. We have V.E. Schwab, so her I am kind of grouping together. Brent Weeks, specifically the Lightbringer series, the Final Fantasy fandom. The R.F. Kwong fandom, and I am grouping hers together. The Cruel Prince, specifically part of Holly Black's fandom. Stephanie Garber, Marissa Meyer, Robin Hobb, Arcane, Lee Bardugo, and Joe Abercrombie. I'm going to go ahead and start with Joe Abercrombie, which means that this is going in the middle. They're really, really, really nice. They seem really excited when you want to talk about Abercrombie. They're like, yeah, isn't it brilliant? I think he's great. They will talk about which ones they think are the weakest in the series. They're never condescending, at least the experience I've had talking about Abercrombie's works. Never condescending. Just really, really, really friendly. But the reason they're not higher is because of what I was saying before. I don't really think of Abercrombie's fans as a fandom. There's very little artwork for the series, which I do think is kind of an indicator of the concept of fandom. There's just people talking about how much they love it on Reddit or here on YouTube. There's very little over on Bookstagram. They just sort of are people that like it, but they don't really seem to go out of their way to talk about how much they like it the same way some of the other ones are. So as far as behavior goes, definitely I could put them in the top. But as far as feeling inspired to create based off of their love of a series, they just don't really seem to have that. The other and only other one that I'm putting in the middle would be V.E. Schwab. I'm very confused because I know that V.E. Schwab's works are very, very, very popular. I don't know if it's just because she has so many, but I don't really get that same thing I've been describing, that sense of community from V.E. Schwab's fans, and I consider myself a fan. Let's go down to a more negative, and we'll go to tier 4, and I'm putting Store My Archive. The Store My Archive fandom has some amazing, amazing people in it. There are people that will have such a fun time theorizing with you. There are people that create awesome, breathtaking artwork for this series. But there are people that if you have a theory that a lot of other people don't really have or they don't agree with, they'll treat you like you're stupid for having a certain prediction or a certain theory. If you don't like the books in the same order as other people, and you think, I liked this one, I don't really like this one, I think this is a weaker entry, they treat you like, how could you possibly think that? Here's why this entry is the best. And if you have something critical to say, even if you're a fan, if you have something critical to say, sometimes they push back in a way that's not really very healthy, or it doesn't really encourage conversation. And then if you don't like Store My Archive, people who have talked openly about not liking Store My Archive, they don't want to talk about it ever again because of the amount of vitriolic, rude, horrible comments that they will get. And it's embarrassing. And I wish the Store My Archive fandom would be better about that. The good side of it is amazing, but the negative side, it is not. And it sadly, for me, brings that fandom down quite a bit. Being a little bit more on the happy side, I think that the Rob and Hob fandom is pretty solid. So I'm putting Hob in tier 2. I think that there's something to the way that they want to converse. There's not as much fan art, which I know I've been talking about that being something I consider pretty significant, but there is a lot of videos about how to get into the realm of the Elderling series, or there's posts about it. And there's just posts in general dissecting the characters in this series and talking about the threads that connect the various different series together. People, I think part of it are so moved, I wish you could say this about Stormlight, but there are some individuals that are so moved by the way in which certain mental health aspects are represented in the series that I think it almost creates a level of compassion for people who don't connect with it, or maybe sometimes because Hob does highlight some pretty traumatic things in her series, I think people are understanding that the way that the trauma is explored is not always going to sit well with everyone, and the people that do like the series will admit, like, I completely understand why you feel that way. I kind of feel that way too. It didn't ruin the book for me, but I can see why. And they're just really respectful, and they're really polite, and they just seem all excited. Even if you don't like it, they're like, well, I like it. And that, I think, is such a great, great attitude. The reason it's not higher is because I don't know that I see a lot of that inspiration to create as much in the fandom, but it's still really, really respectful, really nice, and it's one that, man, I wish I liked Hobbs' books almost because I just think so many of the people in the fandom are so, so lovely. Back down to 4th tier, we have ACOTAR. I am not somebody who has talked all that much about the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I read the first one. I didn't dislike it. I didn't really like it either. It was fine. But I obviously recognize that it is incredibly popular and incredibly hyped. It has, I want to say, at least over 1 million ratings, maybe 2 on Goodreads. So it's obviously huge. And what I was talking about, where anytime something gets that large, the negative amount of that whole is going to increase as the whole increases. And I do find that some of these individuals do and say some pretty petty things. I know when there was a fan casting or a theory about a certain woman playing Feyre in an adaptation, people were saying horrible things about that woman's appearance, and that is never acceptable. I did see a lot of people push back and say that that was horrible behavior, and so that's what keeps this fandom from being lower. And then the same thing where if somebody doesn't like the series, there'll be people that get really upset, and there'll be a lot of people that are along for the ride. They'll say things like, I completely see that, yeah, that part's ridiculous, or yeah, I didn't like the third book in the series either, or they'll laugh at things that happened in the novella, or the newest one, they'll say, yep, definitely too long. So there are people that are receptive, kind, they create gorgeous art for the series, but the negative side of it, while it is pushed back against from within the fandom, it still is large enough that I think it's not the most welcoming on this list. Back up to more welcoming, we have in tier 2, I'm going to list a couple. Final Fantasy. I know this isn't a fandom a ton of other people who maybe watch my channel are going to connect with because it is a video game franchise, and there's so many different, at this point, installments within, you could say. But the only thing really is sometimes people will argue about which one is the best one for sure. And sometimes they'll treat you like, oh, you young kids, you just don't even understand 6 is the best. And there's a little bit of that, but even in that way, it feels somewhat playful and it feels sort of teasing. I've never experienced people being really rude or unkind because you have a disagreement about which one's the best. I think it creates really fun debate. The fandom also makes a lot of really cool videos dissecting how one character, their entire story, how it compares to the villain of the story and where the parallels are and what the differences are that make one of them good and one of them bad and things like that. So it's just that little bit of push to insist that no, this one's the best. And then I also think that sometimes the fandom can be a little unkind to the creators of the games because some of the games have not been the best. And I understand being upset at a product that's not the best, but I don't think that excuses saying and doing things that are hurtful to people's feelings. So that's the only thing keeping it from number 1. And even that it's pretty minuscule. It's not that bad. I think usually it stays in its lane of I didn't like the game, and it doesn't usually turn into something personal against the people that have created the game. But there's tiny bit of that, so that's why it's not in the number 1 spot. I'm going to go ahead and put Kwong, RF Kwong's fans, in the 2nd tier as well. And I could pretty much copy-paste a lot of what I said about Robin Hobb, about that fandom. I could say very similar things about RF Kwong's fandom. I'll add that I have seen some people have some really, to just put it bluntly, stupid takes that are not critical of the books, that are not actually providing interesting conversation toward the books, but they just start to say things about the author, or they say things that are just absolutely asinine. And the fandom will actually engage with those individuals pretty nicely, given how stupid of things that they're saying. Not perfect, there's definitely some negativity in there, but from everything I've seen, it seems much more conversation-based. Another one up here in tier 2 would be Leigh Bardugo's fandom. I have found this fandom to be pretty nice. They're so excited about the show, even if they're disappointed in aspects of the show. They have never treated the actors like trash. They've never come after other people who are involved in the show. I think that they'll hear what Leigh Bardugo is saying. I think there's a level of respect from Bardugo to her fans and the fans to Bardugo. And if you're not into the series and you're critical of, well, not just one series, but the various different ones that Leigh Bardugo has written, I think people are pretty happy to hear what you have to say and have a conversation with you about it. And I think that's fantastic. The reason it's not in the very top is because people get weird about the ships. Last, for the 4th tier, would be the Wheel of Time fandom. This fandom is odd in that it does have people in it that are really nice, that will admit, oh yeah, the slog is the worst, but I love the series. Or they'll admit, yeah, the romances aren't that great, but I love the series. And they'll level with you, and they'll be really, really excited to have a conversation if you're in the middle of the road, if you loved it, or if you kind of hated it. They'll talk to you about it, which I think is really exciting. However, there's a lot of other negative parts. When the show was created, way too many people said some pretty disgusting things about the people involved in the show. And that is never okay. And a lot of people did, within the fandom, push back on those people, which is good to see. And that's what's kept this from being at the very bottom. And then for the people that are much friendlier and nicer, there is a tendency, though, to leave such long comments. And I understand people wanting to have discussions, and I understand people wanting, because it's a long series and there's so much that transpires, and there's so much to the characters and their arcs, that I completely understand. But sometimes it ends up feeling like, when I see those kinds of things, whether it's in a Reddit thread or a comment section, it just feels like they'll take one thing a person said, and they will write so much, and you're like, not everybody has, they're not looking to be convinced. They tried it and it didn't work for them, or they tried it and they're not sure. And I've never seen a fandom, and maybe that says something about why they like the 15, depending on how you look at it, long series, because they're long-winded. I don't know. It's interesting, though, that there is, from what I've noticed, a correlation. But there's definitely some kindness there as well. It's just the negative part of it is negative enough where I had to put it lower. Shooting back up to the second tier, the last two for this, I have the Cruel Prince fandom, because they make the most beautiful pieces of art for this series. People do the coolest makeup looks and hair looks inspired by the descriptions within the series. And if you say, I don't like this series, I don't like the relationships, I think the stakes are dumb, they don't really seem like they care. It seems like they kind of just stay in their lane. Not that they have to, but what I mean is it just seems like they're like, all right, whatever, well, I'm over here. And it doesn't seem as though they don't go out of their way to talk to people who didn't like the series, but they also, because they don't, they're also not being negative toward those individuals either. It's kind of like, well, you can feel that way. I'm going to go hang out with my friends that like it. And that is part of why it's in this second tier and not lower, but it's also part of why it's not in the top tier, because I think a really, really good fandom, it does kind of want to have those conversations, positive or negative. And this one, I haven't really seen a whole lot of engagement anytime there is criticism, for the good and for the bad. It does kind of create that neutrality I was talking about with the third, but there's absolutely, by the third tier I mean, but there's absolutely a sense of community and a sense of fandom, and they do create absolutely stunning pieces of art or content for the series. So that's why it's, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. That's why it's in the second tier. And then the last for this one would be Sanderson fans. Like I said, separate from Stormlight. I think if you have criticisms of Mistborn, the Mistborn fans are more likely to be like, yeah, there are a lot of descriptions of the angles of things, and this person pulled and pushed, and yeah, I can see where it's repetitive, or yeah, I can see how the magic system's delivered pretty directly. I can see where the writing could have been a little stronger. Oh, I get why you don't like the ending. You get it. They seem more receptive to hearing people's less than positive and glowing reviews. And then same goes for, I would say, a lot of the other works by him, not just Mistborn, but if you're talking about the Skyward series, or you're talking about Warbreaker or Elantris, I just find that it's the Stormlight fans that bring everything down. But from what I've seen, the rest of the fandom, which includes, of course, some people, Stormlight's going to be included, but I just find that the rest of the fandom seems pretty just excited to be here, excited to read all the things that Sanderson's written. Now getting to the top and the bottom tiers. I'll start with the top. I think Stephanie Garber's fandom and Marissa Meyer's fandoms are so sweet. They're so sweet. They're just so excited. I actually went to something where Stephanie Garber was speaking at one of my local bookstores, and I was like, I'll go to this. This seems fun. And she was so nice, and everybody in the crowd was just so nice. It was kind of a more intimate setting. Everybody was just so sweet, and it was such a lovely environment to be in. And I think also, oh my gosh, the artwork is so pretty. People make the most beautiful art, and she'll share them to her Instagram stories. And everybody just seems excited about the series. And I know that what I was talking about before with Cruel Prince, it seems like people don't really engage too much with the negativity. I think you could say the same thing where it's not like they find the people that don't like it and they end up having a conversation. I know it's kind of true because it seems like they also stay separate from the negativity, but I think that the sweetness of this fandom sort of pushed it up. And same goes for Marissa Meyer's fans. You could copy paste. I don't really need to say anything separate. It just seems like they're really, really excited about her works. So those two are just absolutely lovely. I'm happy for them. And then going down, Witcher, arguably the worst fandom, and just the most horrible comments. And I don't like wording it by saying, oh, I'm grateful because it helped me stop caring about negativity earlier on. It wasn't a shock when I would get negative comments because it's like, yeah, I've been getting these from the beginning. I don't want to say I'm grateful for that because it almost then applauds people for that behavior, and that's never okay behavior. And I don't mean just at me. I think that once it was getting an adaptation on Netflix, I don't even like the adaptation on Netflix, but the behavior of, you can see how that fandom is when the adaptation on Netflix was in the works, because they were disgusting in how they spoke of the actors in the show. I didn't like the show, but I don't think that excuses, it doesn't give you a pass to be a horrible human being. I mean, just the entitlement. Oh, this new version of a thing that I already have other versions of, I don't like, so that gives me the right to be horrible. No, it doesn't. It doesn't ever. They're awful. It makes me sad. Fandom is the worst. They're one of the worst. And they're not very bright either. They don't come up with good insults or anything. They just say, I don't even want to say the things they say. So we'll move on. Let's go back up to the happy stuff. I almost put this in the second tier, but I'm keeping it at the top for now, and that would be Fourth Wing. I put up a video that was about an hour long, and I was talking consistently about how funny I thought the book was. I don't think the book's meant to be a comedy, but I was greatly amused by so much of the story. And people were really, really nice. A lot of people that were like, I loved this, but oh my gosh, that's so true. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool that they're acting like that. People tagging me on Instagram saying, I read this book, I loved it, but oh my gosh, this review had me dying. And that was awesome. That's awesome. And thus far, it seems like there's not going to be an indication of whether or not there's a ton of artwork or anything at this moment because it's too new. So we'll see. That's why I'm like, I'm not sure. But the behavior thus far has been really, really healthy. They've been really welcoming. They're still like, well, I liked it, so I'm going to keep recommending it. And I just think that that's awesome. So thanks to that fandom for being so cool. And I hope you continue to be cool. And I hope everybody within the fandom is really nice to each other because it's really great to see. Which one do I want to do next? Let's go Lightbringer. Okay. So I talked about how Witcher is about as horrible as you can be. The Brent Weeks fandom is not horrible the way that Witcher is, so I don't want to say that they're the same. But they cannot hear criticism. And I get it. I have had instances where I like a series and somebody says things about the series where I think, I don't really agree with them. And if I don't agree with somebody, either I'll chat with them if it's a collaborative thing or something like that. I'll chat with them and be like, I don't know, I don't think I felt that way. And then we'll have a conversation. Or if I see other people and I don't really know them and I'm not collaborating with them, I just think to myself, I don't feel that way. And then move on with my day. I'll be a little more specific with this one. One of the things that people will say about the Lightbringer series is that there's aspects to it they feel are rather sexist. And I know from my own personal experience when I talked about the series, I went out of my way to say, I'm not saying it is sexist. I'm just going to point out the things in the book that I think are the reason that that is so often a thing said of this series. And then I talked about the various different characters, different things stated, different descriptions, certain behavior that when somebody that was a male character would do something, it was viewed a certain way, and a female character did it, was viewed a different way. So I was going through all the different things. And again, to reiterate, I said, I'm not saying it is. And the amount of people that got mad and said things about me to other people on BookTube. And one of my favorite comments that actually came out of that situation was a person, because if you don't know, in Lightbringer, the way the magic works has to do with colors. And because women can differentiate colors oftentimes better than men, then if anything, the world is sexist against men. And I was like, that's not how sexism works. Last, for the top tier, we have Arcane. One of the biggest reasons why I think this fandom is so great is that I think a good indication of the kind of character of a fandom comes down to how long they have to wait for the next part of the story and how they behave in that waiting period. And the Arcane fandom, currently, we don't know much about the next season. It is probably going to be a while, but everybody's like, yeah, we want it also to be really good, so take all the time you need and we'll be here. And that is so different from what you see with a lot of other groups. And so I think that is a big, big plus for that fandom. Also, I was nervous because I have heard stories about the League of Legends, the way that people who are into that behave. And I was a little nervous going into Arcane because it's part of League of Legends, that a lot of that negativity was going to go into Arcane as well. And I've seen none of it, which is awesome. And a lot of people just really appreciative of the character designs, making videos about how the way their clothing is reflects certain parts of their personality, the way that mental health is represented in the series, why it speaks so personally to them, or why they are so appreciative of it existing and how it destigmatizes things, how it opens our eyes to class differences. So many things about the story then are discussed in such healthy ways, at least from what I've seen. And of course, the inspiration part. It creates so much in people where they're inspired to create their own works of art. And there's some really amazing Arcane art out there. I know it's a little easier because it's already a visual medium, but I wanted to include it because I know a lot of you are also big fans of Arcane, so I wanted to include it on this list. Last one that's left is the Malazan fandom. I did a video recently talking about my somewhat unpopular opinions and talking about books that I thought were fine, but are really, really, really well loved elsewhere. And I mentioned, you'll often hear people say, well, Steven Erikson, most people are used to having their hand held and he doesn't hold your hand. Those sorts of comments. But those are at least pretending, or they really do think that that's a polite way to say something. And then there are people in the fandom that just treat you like you're stupid. And if you don't like it, it's because you're not as intelligent. I'm never going to see somebody calling someone dumb for having criticisms of a book. I'll never see somebody saying, well, you're just stupid. They'll word it in a much more pretentious way than that. But I've never seen a comment like that and immediately thought, oh, that person's so smart. What a great point. The most intelligent people often are not constantly insisting that other people don't like what they like because they're not intelligent. And they're also not constantly trying to tell you how intelligent they are. If anything, it makes you seem insecure. I will never understand putting down another person's intelligence simply because they did not connect with a fictional story on the same level that you did. I'll never get it. I will never get it. It will never be excusable to me. Please just be content to think, well, I disagree, and move on. Belittling another person only makes you look bad. Also, they will so often say that one of the biggest themes in the Malazan series is compassion, and then they show absolutely none of it sometimes to people who don't like the series, who aren't interested in the series, and it's baffling. So I wish I had not ended on that note because it's kind of a sour one, so sorry. But hopefully you've had very different experiences with all of the negative fandoms. And if you've had negative experiences with the positive fandoms, or the ones I categorize as positives, or certain interactions you've seen other people have, certain exchanges, I would love, love, love to see them. And then I think it could be kind of fun to potentially do a part 2, or almost like a follow-up to this video where I'm reacting to a lot of your stories. I also think it could turn a negative into a positive. If you've had a negative experience, then maybe it could, one, make people more mindful who are within the fandom, because sometimes when you're a part of something and you really love it, you don't really see the way the fandom can behave towards people that don't love it. Or sometimes you don't see the way people treat even others within the fandom because you tend to have maybe the popular opinion, and you don't really see the positive but unpopular opinions and how people get treated even in that way. I think some of the Wheel of Time fandom has had that experience. I talked about that with Stormlight Archive. So I would love to know your stories. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and don't forget to check out Novel Wicks candles. I'll have them linked. But anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.